In early May 1940, German forces launched Operation Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, a full-scale offensive aimed at annihilating Allied forces in Western Europe, particularly in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. This was a bold move based on blitzkrieg tactics, combining mobile armored units, mechanized infantry, and air support, representing a revolutionary approach to warfare. The German plan aimed to mislead the Allies by advancing into Belgium and the Netherlands, evoking memories of the Schlieffen Plan of 1914, while the main forces of Panzergruppe Kleist and Army Group A moved through the Ardennes forest, an area considered impassable and lightly defended. The Allies, believing the Ardennes to be a natural barrier, did not anticipate the Germans' extraordinary armored advance, leading to significant initial losses and confusion in Allied command. At the spearhead was the 19th and Panzer Corps, led by General Heinz Guderian, one of the key architects of Blitzkrieg. This force comprised 3 powerful armored divisions, supported by mechanized infantry and artillery, capable of moving at unprecedented speeds. Guderian maximized the use of radio communications between forward units and the Luftwaffe, allowing immediate Stuka strikes on enemy positions within an hour. This coordination not only reduced French and Belgian resistance, but also created a severe psychological impact, leaving the enemy unable to respond effectively. On May 13th, after devastating Luftwaffe bombings, the 19th Panzer Corps crossed the Meuse River at Sedan, marking a turning point in the campaign. The French defensive lines collapsed rapidly, partly due to the combination of bombing, mobile armor, and the French forces' lack of tactical preparation. French and Belgian units were cut off, thrown into chaos, and unable to coordinate. German forces, moving at near astonishing speed, advanced from Sedan to the English Channel in just 10 days, a feat that even surprised German commanders. Part of this success came from the armored unit's ability to appear unexpectedly at weak points, particularly the 7th Division, later called the Ghost Division, for its mobility and surprise in operations. Air power played a decisive role in this advance. The Luftwaffe, under Hermann Göring and commanders like Wolfram von Richthofen, conducted extensive support bombing, destroying artillery positions, bridges, and infrastructure. Stuka dive bombers, equipped with wailing sirens, demoralized enemy troops and facilitated rapid armored advances with minimal resistance. Forward officers continuously communicated with pilots, pinpointing targets accurately, and coordinated with mechanized infantry for attacks. This system allowed German forces not only to break through French defenses, but also to separate Allied forces, preventing them from regrouping for counterattacks. Alongside armored divisions, traditional and mechanized infantry advanced through corridors opened by tanks, capturing key cities and breaking French and Belgian defensive capabilities. Through the perfect combination of speed, firepower, and psychological impact, German forces won decisive victories at Dinant, Namur, and Noyelles-sur-Somme, opening a corridor to the English Channel. The Germans' lightning advance forced Allied troops to retreat continuously, abandoning equipment and weapons along the way, creating vast stores of war booty captured by German forces. Notably, this rapid advance also posed logistical and maintenance challenges. German armored units suffered rapid wear due to continuous operations, with many divisions reporting only about 50% of their armor operational by the campaign's end. Infantry struggled to keep up with the tanks, making flank security and communication critical. Furthermore, capturing flooded areas and the flat terrain along the Channel coast required German forces to adapt quickly, using pontoon bridges, mechanized vehicles, and mobile artillery to maintain pressure on encircled Allied troops. Beyond tactical success, the German Blitz had profound psychological effects. German soldiers witnessed the Allies' repeated failures, the chaos in captured cities and the enemy's retreats, creating a near-total sense of victory. Field reports, commanders' diaries, and soldiers' accounts recorded astonishment at the speed of the advance, the inter-branch coordination, and the overwhelming tactical effectiveness. However, this phase also revealed strategic limits, as supply lines, armor maintenance, and unit coordination were increasingly strained by the rapid advance. Within less than 2 weeks, German panzer and mechanized infantry forces successfully split the Allied armies and reached Dunkirk, creating the so-called Dunkirk Pocket, where hundreds of thousands of British, French, and Belgian soldiers found themselves trapped with their backs to the sea, seemingly without escape. This was the result of blitzkrieg, fast, unexpected, overwhelming in firepower and psychological impact, demonstrating modern German military philosophy: attack swiftly, coordinate efficiently, and strike the enemy's weak points before they can react. In summary, the German lightning advance from May 10 to 20, 1940 exemplifies blitzkrieg tactics. German forces combined mobile armor, mechanized infantry, artillery, and air power to achieve an unprecedented breakthrough, seize key areas, split Allied forces, and dominate enemy morale. This tactical success laid the foundation for the next phase at Dunkirk, while exposing strategic, logistical, and psychological challenges for the Germans, simultaneously providing a critical opportunity for the Allies, a chance they would soon exploit in the historic evacuation. Immediately after the German forces achieved their lightning advances during Operation Fall Gelb, encircling the Allies at Dunkirk, the next unexpected development became a crucial turning point for the entire campaign. On May 24, 1940, as Guderian's Panzergruppe Kleist approached the English Channel, preparing to deliver the final blow to the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, and most of the surrounded French forces, Hitler issued a halt order historically known as the Halt Order. This order required German armored and mechanized units to temporarily hold their positions, refrain from crossing the AA Canal and defensive works around Dunkirk, and prepare for defensive operations. The decision caused surprise, frustration, and even extreme anger within the German armored divisions, especially Guderian's 19th and Panzer Corps, who stood within sight of the harbor and saw an almost certain victory slip away. The halt order had complex reasons, stemming from tactical, logistical, and political considerations. First, German commanders were concerned about armor losses and supply security. After nearly 2 weeks of continuous rapid advances, armored divisions had suffered significant mechanical and combat losses. Some reported that only about 50% of their tanks were operational. Supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers from rear logistics centers to the front, making it difficult for infantry and armored brigades to maintain the initial speed of the offensive. General von Rundstedt, commander of Army Group A, and other generals worried that continuing into the flooded coastal areas of the Channel could expose armored units to flank attacks, leading to further heavy losses. Second, human factors and leadership psychology played a decisive role. Hitler, haunted by experiences from World War I, particularly heavy German losses in Flanders, feared that advancing into the marshy terrain around Dunkirk could render his armored units vulnerable. At the same time, Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, assured Hitler that German air power could destroy the encircled forces from the air, convincing Hitler that it was unnecessary to risk his tanks on the ground. Göring emphasized that Stuka dive bombers and bombers would be sufficient to clear Dunkirk, while the tanks could temporarily hold defensive positions and await air support. Third, concerns about coordination and flanks also influenced the halt. On the ground, German armored divisions had advanced so rapidly that infantry could not keep pace. Allowing tanks to continue without full mechanized infantry and artillery support risked counterattacks, especially as reports from Arras indicated that British and French forces still retained some offensive capability. Frontline commanders like Guderian warned that halting might give the enemy time to organize defenses, but the order came directly from Hitler, bypassing normal command channels. The immediate impact of the halt was profound. German forces, especially Guderian's armored divisions, had to stop at the AA Canal, remove pontoon bridges, and hold defensive positions. Meanwhile, the surrounded British, French, and Belgian forces recognized their chance to escape. They began organizing a massive evacuation, Operation Dynamo, mobilizing every available seafaring vessel, warships, fishing boats, passenger ships, small sailing vessels, and even civilian private boats. Over the next 3 days, while the German armor remained inactive under orders, Allied forces gradually moved to the coast and began evacuating hundreds of thousands of troops. The halt also caused psychological tension among German troops. Guderian and other commanders felt anger and frustration as a near-total victory was postponed. Diaries and memoirs later described their sense of helplessness, watching Allied ships carry troops to safety, unable to intervene. Many German soldiers directly witnessed disciplined Allied withdrawals using terrain, pontoon bridges, and civilian vessels to evacuate, demonstrating organizational skill and determination the Germans had not anticipated. Moreover, the effectiveness of the Luftwaffe was limited by bad weather and strong RAF resistance. Despite Göring's assurances to Hitler, Stuka's and bomber crews faced British fighters, limited fuel, and long distances, reducing bombing effectiveness. While the Luftwaffe damaged some ships and infrastructure, most Allied forces escaped Dunkirk intact. Although the halt reflected caution and force preservation, it became a serious strategic mistake. The Germans forfeited the chance to destroy most of the BEF, a professional, well-equipped force that would become the backbone of Britain's continued resistance. Historians argue that if Guderian and his armored divisions had been allowed to advance, a complete encirclement might have ended the war in Western Europe prematurely, possibly forcing Britain to consider peace negotiations. The halt thus became a strategic turning point, transforming a tactical victory into a missed opportunity and allowing most Allied forces to survive and form the foundation for subsequent campaigns. The halt also affected German morale and command relations. Guderian and other frontline commanders felt it limited tactical freedom and undermined soldiers' spirit. Meanwhile, Göring maintained his assurances about the Luftwaffe's capabilities, reinforcing Hitler's confidence. After the war, Guderian described the decision as having the most disastrous impact on the entire course of the war, emphasizing that restraint turned an almost certain victory into a lost opportunity. In the 3 days following the halt, German armored units primarily maintained defensive positions, constructed pontoon bridges, and prepared for combat, while most Allied forces consolidated coastal defenses and prepared for evacuation. This highlighted the tension between tactical success and long-term strategy. German forces dominated in mobility, firepower, and speed, but had not accounted for the enemy's organizational skill, resilience, and the unexpected mobilization of Britain's civilian navy. In summary, Hitler's halt order from May 24 to 26, 1940, was a pivotal decision that dramatically altered the Dunkirk campaign. It reflected tactical caution, force preservation, trust in the Luftwaffe, and Hitler's personal World War I experience. While it conserved German strength and prevented large losses, it also allowed Allied forces to escape, maintain combat capability, and lay the groundwork for subsequent operations against Germany. After Hitler's halt order, the heavy responsibility of destroying the encircled forces at Dunkirk fell almost entirely on the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. Hermann Göring, commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, assured Hitler that his aircraft could annihilate the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, and the remaining French forces before they had a chance to retreat. This confidence stemmed from Luftwaffe's early successes in Poland and France, where it had demonstrated superior effectiveness in supporting armored units and conducting strategic bombing. However, at Dunkirk, what Göring was most confident about became a significant failure with long-term strategic consequences. The Luftwaffe deployed a massive force of over 300 bombers and 550 fighters. Key units included Luftflotte 2, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Luftflotte 3, led by Hugo Sperle, and Fliegerkorps VIII, commanded by Wolfram von Richthofen, specializing in Stuka dive bombers. All were mobilized to bomb Dunkirk and surrounding areas, targeting Allied troops, ships, and port infrastructure. Squadrons attacked in successive waves from morning to evening, hoping to sow panic and force surrender. However, the Luftwaffe soon faced serious limitations. First, there were issues of range and fuel. Pilots had to fly from bases in Belgium or behind German lines, leaving only about 10 minutes over the target for many squadrons before returning to refuel. Heavy Stuka dive bombers, dangerous when escorted, became vulnerable without fighter cover. Continuous attacks over nearly 2 weeks also caused pilot fatigue, equipment wear, and reduced combat effectiveness. Second, the defensive and counterattack capabilities of the Allies exceeded German expectations. The Royal Air Force, RAF, especially Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons operating from southern England, intercepted many Luftwaffe raids. British pilots coordinated closely with coastal anti-aircraft units and ground fire, inflicting heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. On the first day alone, the Luftwaffe lost 23 aircraft, including experienced pilots difficult to replace quickly. Harsh weather, Rain, wind, and smoke from burning oil depots further reduced bombing accuracy and target visibility. Despite the Luftwaffe's maximum efforts, Allied forces organized strong defensive positions. British and French troops deployed along canals and coastlines, using anti-tank fire, minefields, barriers, and flooded terrain as obstacles. British battalions maintained discipline, executed orderly withdrawals, and protected pontoon bridges and port entrances, while French infantry divisions prevented German flanking attacks. These efforts slowed German advances and allowed hundreds of thousands of troops to escape Dunkirk. A key factor in the Allies' successful defense was the mobilization of the British civilian navy. Sailing vessels, fishing boats, river ferries, and private boats participated in Operation Dynamo, transporting soldiers from beaches to larger ships offshore while under fire from the Luftwaffe and German artillery. This coordination demonstrated exceptional organization and determination, far exceeding German expectations. Meanwhile, German ground forces could not effectively attack. Most of Guderian's armored divisions and other units remained stationary under the halt order. Disconnected, uncoordinated attacks between armor and infantry prevented Germans from exploiting their superiority in numbers and firepower. Many divisions were restricted by flooded terrain, waiting for infantry and artillery support, resulting in a lost opportunity to annihilate the encircled forces. The combination of stubborn Allied defense and Luftwaffe limitations led to an unexpected outcome. Despite superiority in firepower and numbers, the Germans could not prevent most Allied troops from retreating safely. From May 26 to 31, 1940, approximately 338,000 British and 140,000 French and Belgian soldiers were evacuated to Britain, while Germany captured only about 40,000 prisoners, gaining equipment but failing to break Allied morale. German observers described the beaches as resembling a disturbed anthill, with orderly troop withdrawals coordinated with civilian vessels. Even as the Luftwaffe continued bombing, pilot fatigue, poor weather, and RAF resistance prevented maximal effectiveness. On June 1st, improved weather allowed the Luftwaffe to destroy some ships, but most Allied forces had already escaped. Luftwaffe thus failed to fulfill Göring's promise to Hitler, becoming a primary reason for the failure to fully encircle Dunkirk. The Luftwaffe's failure had far-reaching strategic implications. Evacuated Allied forces were re-equipped, retained combat morale, and formed the core of Britain's continued resistance. Had the Luftwaffe destroyed the entire BEF, Britain might have been forced to negotiate peace, altering the war in Western Europe and relations with the US. The failure demonstrated that even air superiority cannot guarantee strategic success if ground coordination and enemy capabilities are underestimated. Beyond military lessons, Dunkirk illustrated the importance of psychology and organization. German officers and soldiers witnessed disciplined Allied evacuations despite encirclement, challenging assumptions about inevitable victory and revealing that persistence, organization, and morale could overcome mechanical and numerical superiority, something Germany had not previously faced. Finally, Dunkirk showed that coordinated defense, determined leadership, and civilian resource mobilization could reverse temporary tactical disadvantages. British and French forces combined defensive strategy, orderly withdrawals, and maximal use of civilian vessels to execute one of the largest evacuations in military history, transforming a potential tactical defeat into a strategic and moral victory. In short, during the Dunkirk campaign, the Luftwaffe failed to destroy the encircled Allied forces, while the determined defense discipline and organization of British and French troops, coupled with the unexpected mobilization of the civilian navy, enabled over 300,000 soldiers to escape. This not only preserved experienced forces for continued combat, but also provided Britain with a psychological and military foundation, shaping the course of the war in Europe and forcing Germany to revise its strategies for future campaigns. Dunkirk thus stands as a vivid testament to the limits of air power and the critical importance of morale, organization, and resourcefulness in defense, marking a major turning point in World War II. The Dunkirk evacuation, although a temporary tactical failure for Germany, since they failed to destroy the entire British Expeditionary Force, BEF, and the remaining French forces, produced profound strategic consequences and psychological effects that neither Germany nor the Allies had anticipated. The successful rescue of over 338,000 British and nearly 140,000 French and Belgian troops altered the course of the war in Western Europe, while also creating a significant morale boost for Britain, influencing both German and Allied policies and strategies in the following years. For Nazi Germany, the clearest strategic consequence stemmed from the fact that Hitler and his generals misjudged the capability and morale of their opponents. They believed the BEF would be completely encircled and destroyed, and that seizing the Dunkirk coastline would force Britain to negotiate peace or at least weaken British fighting spirit. In reality, the British forces successfully retreated, preserving combat experience, discipline, and valuable equipment, forming the backbone of a reorganized British army ready to continue fighting in subsequent campaigns, notably the Battle of Britain and the North African Campaign. This outcome created unprecedented strategic challenges for Germany, as they now faced a highly capable, well-organized, and determined British force instead of a neutralized one. A second consequence was the long-term impact on Germany's strategic planning across Europe. Dunkirk demonstrated that although blitzkrieg tactics were effective for rapid advances and encirclements, they could not guarantee absolute strategic victory if the opponent was capable of flexible defense and had high morale. Germany had to adjust future campaigns, particularly when confronting the surviving Anglo-French Belgian forces, as well as preparing for the campaign against the Soviet Union. Post-war German military studies confirmed that Dunkirk marked a strategic turning point where Germany lost the chance to eliminate Britain early in the war, forcing them into a longer and more complex conflict, a scenario Hitler had sought to avoid to prevent a two-front war. Psychologically, Dunkirk became a symbol of resilience and the will to survive. In Britain, news of hundreds of thousands of soldiers being safely evacuated, even after initial defeat in France, generated a wave of public excitement and strengthened confidence in the country's ability to resist. Winston Churchill famously described the event as a miracle of deliverance, a message that boosted both military morale and national spirit, preparing Britain for subsequent German air campaigns, especially during the Battle of Britain. For the Germans, witnessing the Allies retreat successfully without being fully destroyed created frustration, doubt, and tension within the command structure. Generals such as Guderian and other armored commanders expressed dissatisfaction with the halt order and the Luftwaffe's failure to complete its mission. Despite German superiority in numbers and firepower, the inability to annihilate the enemy led to a strategic failure within a tactical victory, a true Pyrrhic victory. This mindset influenced later German strategic decisions, making them more cautious in some campaigns and generating internal tensions between commanders and branches, particularly between the Heer, Army Armored Forces, and the Luftwaffe. Another psychological factor was the increased respect for British capability and morale within the German military. Prior to Dunkirk, the British were considered lacking in fighting spirit and vulnerable. However, the organized retreat, coordination with the Royal Navy, and mobilization of civilian vessels demonstrated the British could operate effectively under extreme pressure, maintain order, and preserve their fighting capability. This forced German commanders to reevaluate the enemy, affecting plans for Operation Sea Lion and casting doubt on Germany's ability to achieve necessary air superiority. Strategically, the successful evacuation also had global implications. The survival of the BEF and remaining French forces ensured Britain could continue resisting Germany, providing the basis for U.S. Lend-Lease aid and eventual American involvement in Europe. Had Dunkirk ended in total disaster, Britain might have been forced to negotiate peace, fundamentally altering Allied relations and potentially delaying or preventing a second front in Europe. Thus, Dunkirk was not merely a military event, but a global strategic and political turning point, influencing the planning of subsequent operations by both sides. Dunkirk also offered a key lesson in underestimating opponents and the importance of morale. German officers observing the successful retreat realized that flexible coordination, creativity, and determination could overturn even the most sophisticated tactical plans. They understood that battlefield victory does not automatically translate into strategic victory. To truly defeat an enemy, both capability and morale must be neutralized, a lesson Germany failed to fully apply in later campaigns, especially against the Soviet Union and the Allies post-1941. Furthermore, Dunkirk had a lasting psychological impact on German troops and the public. Initially, German propaganda claimed the BEF had been destroyed, and the campaign in France was a perfect victory. However, soldiers witnessed hundreds of thousands of enemies escaping, which led to skepticism about propaganda claims and questions about Hitler's leadership and strategic decisions. The gap between reality and official information undermined confidence and raised doubts about Germany's ability to achieve absolute victory, influencing morale in later campaigns. Finally, the positive psychological effect on the Allies extended beyond Britain. The evacuation of French and Belgian forces alongside the British preserved morale across Europe and demonstrated effective coordination among Allied nations. This later became a crucial factor in forming coalitions against Germany, from the Soviet Union to the United States, proving that cooperation and determination could overturn Germany's temporary tactical advantages. In conclusion, the strategic and psychological consequences of Dunkirk were immense and multifaceted. Strategically, Germany lost the opportunity to destroy Britain early, delaying its invasion plans and forcing it into a prolonged conflict. Psychologically, Dunkirk boosted British morale, strengthened Allied confidence, and undermined German self-assurance, highlighting the limits of blitzkrieg. Dunkirk was not just a successful military evacuation, it was a strategic and psychological turning point in World War II, demonstrating that even when encircled, organization, determination, and fighting spirit can change the course of war, and that battlefield victories do not always equate to strategic success. Dunkirk was not merely a military evacuation, it became a historical symbol of willpower, strategy, and long-term impact on the course of World War II. From strategic, psychological, military, and political perspectives, the event left profound lessons that influenced how nations approached war in the following years, and even shaped modern military strategy. Strategically, Dunkirk demonstrated that a tactical victory does not automatically equate to strategic success. The German forces, employing blitzkrieg tactics, achieved astonishing advances across France and Belgium, splitting the Allied forces and creating an almost perfect opportunity to annihilate the British Expeditionary Force. However, the failure to seize this decisive opportunity, through the halt order and coordination errors between the Heer and Luftwaffe, meant Germany lost the chance to finish off Britain early in the war. This directly impacted Operation Sea Lion, forcing Germany to confront a preserved, experienced, and resilient British force, increasing the difficulty and risk of any invasion campaign. Dunkirk also illustrated the importance of inter-service coordination and military synergy. Despite immense pressure, the evacuation smoothly integrated the Royal Navy, the Air Force, and civilian resources, including small boats, yachts, and fishing vessels, into an extraordinary rescue network. This showed that military power depends not only on weapons or troop numbers, but also on organization, creativity, and national resolve. Germany failed to grasp this in time, underestimating the enemy's ingenuity and resilience, leading to subsequent setbacks in the Battle of Britain and the North African campaigns. Psychologically, Dunkirk had a profound impact on both Britain and Germany. For Britain, it became the embodiment of the Dunkirk Spirit, the nation's resilience, unity, and will to survive. Even after losing most of France, Britain maintained military capability and fighting spirit, strengthening public confidence and motivating subsequent campaigns. This morale boost elevated the courage of troops and reinforced political resolve, enabling the British government to resist negotiating peace with Germany. It demonstrated that psychological effects can be as important, or even more so, than direct military outcomes, influencing strategic decisions and national loyalty. For Germany, Dunkirk caused psychological disruption. Generals such as Guderian, RML, and other armored commanders expressed frustration with the halt order and the Luftwaffe's limited effectiveness. The event showed that even overwhelming military victories could become strategic failures if one underestimates the enemy's morale, capabilities, and determination. Observing hundreds of thousands of troops escape encirclement shook German soldiers' confidence in their command as strategy, creating internal tension among the Heer, Luftwaffe, and Central Command, affecting subsequent operational decisions in campaigns like those in the Soviet Union and North Africa. Dunkirk also highlighted the importance of assessing the opponent and predicting military behavior. Previously, the British were perceived as easily overpowered, yet the event proved their adaptability, coordination, and fighting spirit. British and French troops retreated in an orderly fashion, maintaining discipline and combat readiness, forcing German commanders to reassess their understanding of Allied strength and morale. This required Germany to adjust its planning when facing a surviving and battle-hardened Britain, influencing strategic decisions across Western and Northern Europe in the following years. Militarily, Dunkirk revealed the limitations of blitzkrieg and mechanized warfare in complex, real-world environments. Despite remarkable achievements by German tanks and aircraft, the lack of coordination with infantry, restricted mobility in flooded forests and marshes, and fluctuating air superiority reduced the operation's effectiveness. It demonstrated that technology and speed alone do not guarantee final victory. Comprehensive strategy, joint force coordination, and accurate assessment of enemy defenses are crucial. Another aspect was the long-term impact on Germany's global strategy. The survival of British forces, along with the BEF serving as a nucleus for army reorganization, forced Germany into a prolonged war, while enabling U.S. support for Britain via Lend-Lease and eventual direct involvement. Had Dunkirk ended in total disaster, Britain might have been forced to negotiate peace, altering the balance of power and compelling different strategic choices, with potential implications for U.S. and Soviet actions. Dunkirk thus became a decisive turning point, where a German tactical victory led to unforeseen strategic consequences. Dunkirk also influenced military education and modern warfare theory. Post-war analyses by German and international scholars emphasize Dunkirk as a vivid lesson in the risks of incomplete victories, the need for synchronization between tactics, strategy, and politics, and the critical role of human factors and morale in warfare. Military academies in Germany, Britain, and the U.S. have used Dunkirk to teach officers about strategic decision-making, balancing risk and opportunity, and preparing for comprehensive operations. Finally, Dunkirk's cultural and symbolic legacy endures. In Britain, it represents national unity, resilience, and determination against invasion. Stories of small boats, fishing vessels, and private yachts participating in the evacuation are preserved in public memory and educational traditions as examples of courage, creativity, and community spirit. In France, Dunkirk highlights French sacrifice and determination, especially at positions like Le Havre, where they delayed German forces to aid the retreat. For Germany, Dunkirk remains a lesson in the limitations of military power without understanding enemy morale and capacity, illustrating the long-term consequences of strategic decisions. In conclusion, Dunkirk was a war event with lasting significance across strategy, psychology, military operations, politics, and culture. It demonstrated that even in desperate situations, organization, creativity, and coordination can change the course of events. It also showed that an incomplete military victory can lead to severe strategic consequences. Dunkirk shaped how the Allies and Germany evaluated warfare, planned campaigns, and educated military leaders, leaving a historical symbol of faith, hope, and resilience. Its lessons remain relevant for modern strategy, reminding us that true victory requires combining military strength with accurate assessment of enemy morale, will, and capabilities, and that every strategic decision can shape a nation's fate.